Hi, my name is Elowen. I'm 32, and at my sister's wedding, my father gave her the title to the house I helped buy, then turned to me and said, "It's time you move out." It should have been her special day, but instead it became the moment I realized everything I'd given, my savings, my silence, my loyalty, was being handed to someone else like I'd never existed. "You've always been the strong one," he told me once. I used to think that was a compliment. Now I know it was an excuse. Before I tell you how I took back what they tried to erase, leave a like if you've ever had to fight harder just to be seen. And hit subscribe, one small click, but a powerful reminder that these stories matter and you're listening. Because this was only the beginning. I never cared much for weddings. Too many expectations dressed up in lace and champagne. But that day, I stood in the corner of the grand ballroom in downtown Seattle, clutching a glass of untouched wine, watching my younger sister Celine bask in the glow of 1,000 fairy lights. She looked radiant. Of course she did. Celine always had that effortless grace, the kind that pulled people in. A live-string quartet played something soft and romantic, but I barely heard it. My ears buzzed with the kind of silence that follows a storm you didn't see coming. Dad raised his glass. Victor Marwood, real estate tycoon, master of appearances, and the man who taught me that love always came with a price tag. "To Celine and her new beginning," he said, his voice smooth, commanding, "and to the home she and Logan will build together, the deed is yours." Cheers erupted, cameras flashed. Celine gasped and clutched her new husband's hand, but I froze. My heart plummeted. The house, our house, the same house I had helped Dad buy 2 years ago, funneling $35,000 of my savings into the down payment. Every overtime shift, every canceled vacation, every rented apartment while I waited for the renovation to finish, all of it was supposed to lead to something shared, not this. I blinked too fast. My cheeks burned, but not from embarrassment. It was rage, cold and creeping like fog rolling off Puget Sound. Then Dad turned to me. Still smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Elowen," he said into the mic, "it's time to move out now." A few guests chuckled, unsure if it was a joke. It wasn't. I felt the weight of every pair of eyes in that room pinning me down. I didn't move, couldn't. 1,000 champagne bubbles floated upward, while something inside me sank deeper and darker. He'd erased me, in front of everyone. My fingers curled around the stem of the glass. I was afraid I'd crush it. Beside me, someone whispered, "Wasn't she living there too?" Another voice responded, "Maybe it was just temporary." I couldn't breathe, couldn't blink. My lungs tightened, but my mind was sharper than ever, not just with pain, but with clarity. This wasn't a mistake. It was planned. My father had waited until the crowd, the cameras, and the perfect backdrop to deliver the final blow. I turned, walked out without a word. The air outside hit like a slap, brisk, metallic. The hum of Seattle streets offered no comfort, only noise. As I stepped into the back seat of a rideshare, I finally allowed myself one question. Why? Why now? Why like this? And deep beneath that, something uglier. What else has he taken from me? By the time I reached my apartment, the city lights had blurred into a dull smear on the window pane. I sat in the dark, the hem of my dress clutched in one hand like a lifeline, replaying the moment over and over again. Celine never looked surprised. Her eyes had darted toward me for only a second, long enough to register guilt. Or was it shame? Did she know? I closed my eyes, counted backward from 10, tried not to cry. But tears came anyway, not the loud, broken kind. Just quiet rivers tracing the edges of everything I tried to hold in. I'd spent my whole life earning my place, through grades, through grit, through silence, and still I wasn't enough. But maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the one who should be ashamed, because something else stirred beneath the grief. A plan, a slow, smoldering plan I hadn't dared consider before. They thought I'd leave quietly. They didn't know me at all. I used to think that if I worked hard enough, Dad would see me. Straight A's, honor roll, part-time jobs after school. I stacked accomplishments like sandbags against the flood of his indifference. But Celine, she got praised for breathing. The first time I noticed the difference, I was 9. It was her birthday, pink balloons tangled in the kitchen fan. She was sobbing over a broken doll. Dad stormed out, came back an hour later with the exact same one, imported from Germany, he said, because his little girl deserved the best. She hugged him like he was a hero. 2 weeks later, I brought home a math trophy. He nodded without looking up from his laptop. "Good," he muttered. "Keep it up." I remember how cold the house felt that day. Gray light leaked in through the blinds, and the heater clicked but didn't hum. I stood there, holding that stupid gold plastic award, and smiled anyway, because I didn't know what else to do. Now, sitting in my apartment after the wedding, those memories came rushing back. They weren't flashes, they were anchors. The city outside had quieted. All I could hear was the whir of my fridge and the distant rumble of a bus 2 blocks down. My shoes were still on, heels digging into the rug like I needed to be ready to run. My phone buzzed. A text from Celine. "Can we talk tomorrow?" I ignored it. Let her enjoy her deeded castle. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stared at the fridge magnets. One was shaped like a lemon. I hated that magnet. But Dad gave it to me when I moved into this place. "Start somewhere," he'd said. What a joke. He always made me feel like a provisional member of the family, someone who hadn't earned full access. Back in high school, I remember staying up late to finish a group project after my teammates bailed. I presented it solo, nailed it, and came home hoping he'd say something. Anything. Instead, he lectured me for missing dinner. Disrespectful, he'd called it. Family comes first. Unless you're me, I guess. Celine could skip meals, break curfew, fail exams, and he'd still defend her. "She's sensitive," he'd say. "She needs support." What did I need? A spine of steel, apparently. But there was one night I couldn't forget. I was 17. I'd just been accepted to a summer program at Northwestern. Fully paid. Competitive as hell. I was ecstatic. He barely glanced at the letter. "We can't afford distractions right now," he said. "You'll work with me over the summer." The way he said it, like it was a done deal, like my dream didn't matter, it cracked something in me. That night I stayed up late pretending to read. Around midnight I heard him on the phone in his study. His voice was low, sharp. "I'm not paying another cent on that deal. They can take the damn land." Pause. No, we'll recover. I have a backup plan, a second chance." I sat frozen on the stairs, heart pounding. He never saw me, but I never forgot those words. Second chance. That was 15 years ago. I still don't know what deal he meant, or what he lost. He's always kept the past sealed tight, a vault no one was allowed to touch, even Celine, or maybe especially her. I walked over to my desk and pulled out a faded notebook, the one where I tracked every payment I made toward the house. Down payment, $20,000 renovation costs I paid out of pocket, $15,000 furniture, garden, utilities, not even counted. I traced the numbers with my finger, hand trembling slightly. He acted like it didn't matter, like I didn't matter. And Celine just stood there at the wedding, eyes glossy, lips parted in a silent apology that never came. My head throbbed. I pressed a cold can from the fridge to my temple and closed my eyes. If there was one thing Dad taught me, it's that control is currency, and he never let go of a single coin unless he saw a return. So what's the return in giving Celine that house? Was it just cruelty? No, Victor Marwood didn't move without purpose. That gift meant something, and my absence served something. My phone buzzed again, a voicemail this time, but not from Celine. I didn't recognize the number. I hit play, static, then a breath, then silence. Then the message ended. I replayed it twice, still nothing, but it didn't feel accidental. It felt deliberate, like a placeholder, like someone wanted me to know they were there, watching, waiting. I deleted it, or tried to, but my finger hovered. I needed to know more, about the money, about the deal, about why Dad decided I didn't belong anymore. And that memory from the stairs, it wasn't just some ancient hurt anymore. It was a thread. I was going to pull it. They say memory lives in things, dust, wood, old paper, all of it holding secrets we pretend we've forgotten. 2 days after the wedding, I drove back to the estate. Not for them, for the truth. The sky over Seattle was overcast, the kind of pale gray that blurred the edges of everything. Victor's house, no, their house now, stood smug on its hilltop, manicured to the inch. It had always felt too clean, too curated, like a lie wrapped in cedar siding. I parked at the edge of the driveway, engine ticking as it cooled. I waited, half expecting someone to come out and stop me. No one did. The front door opened with a reluctant creak. Inside, the air was stale with disuse and lavender cleaner. Celine and Logan must have still been on their honeymoon. Good. I didn't want witnesses. I took off my shoes at the door. Habit. My feet sank into the plush carpet as I climbed the stairs, each step a drumbeat of nerves. The attic was at the very top, behind a narrow wooden door that stuck in the frame like it didn't want to be opened. I had to shove with my shoulder to get it to budge. Inside, the air turned dry and papery. The light bulb flickered once, then stayed lit, a single amber glow in a room that hadn't changed in years. Boxes, trunks, forgotten furniture covered in white sheets like ghosts in waiting. I scanned the room. My name wasn't on anything. Of course it wasn't. Still, I moved through it slowly, fingers trailing dust, old Christmas decorations, a cracked globe, the wooden cradle Dad swore he'd hand-carved for Celine. In the far corner, a steamer trunk rested beneath a yellowed tarp. I knelt beside it. The metal latch groaned as I lifted it. Inside, linens, some faded photos, a half-crushed cigar box, and under that, folded so carefully it felt suspicious, a letter. Not to me. To Victor. The paper was thick, brittle at the edges, its handwriting a spiderweb of urgent loops. I sat back on my heels and read. Victor. The deal didn't go through. They pulled the funding. We're exposed. If this gets out, we lose everything. I know you said you had another plan, but I'm not sure it'll hold. You promised this would fix the debt. R. My throat dried up. Debt? What debt? The Victor I knew. The one who shamed me into giving up a scholarship? The one who dressed in $3,000 suits to lecture me on responsibility? That man didn't lose money. And yet, I read the letter again. We're exposed. This wasn't some small loss. This was ruin. Covered up. Buried. And suddenly, everything made a new kind of sense. The controlling behavior, the tight grip on family finances, the need to own everything, the house, our time, our silence. He wasn't protecting us. He was protecting himself. I sat on the attic floor, the letter trembling in my hand. Dust floated in the light like ash. The wooden beams above me creaked under their own weight. What did he do to cover this up? And how much of my life had been shaped by the fallout of this, something I'd never been allowed to know? I took out my phone and snapped a picture of the letter. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet, but I knew I couldn't leave it here. As I stood, the floorboard under me shifted with a loud crack. I froze. Was someone else in the house? I waited. No footsteps, no voices, just the slow hum of silence pressing in. Still, something felt wrong, like I was being watched. I backed out of the attic, closing the door behind me and bracing it with an old chair. Downstairs, I paused in the kitchen. The faucet dripped once. The digital clock on the microwave blinked, stuck at 2:17. Power outage, maybe, but it didn't feel like coincidence. I reached the front door and opened it fast. No one. Only the wind and the low hum of traffic in the distance, but I saw them. Faint, barely visible in the gravel near the steps. Tire tracks, fresh, facing out. Someone had just left. Or waited. I locked the door behind me and left through the side path, sticking to the trees until I reached the street. My heart thudded in my ears the whole way back to the car. Inside, with the doors locked and engine running, I placed the letter on the passenger seat and stared at it. A failed deal. A second plan. Debt. I had questions, hundreds of them, and the only person with answers was the one who'd erased me, Victor. And he wasn't just a bad father, he was a liar, possibly worse. The house was never a gift. It was a shield, a cover, a bribe. And if he'd risked financial collapse once, what was he risking now? What else had he buried that I hadn't found yet? Because something told me this letter wasn't the only thing hidden in that house. I didn't sleep that night. The letter sat on the nightstand like a ticking clock too loud to ignore. I stared at the ceiling for hours, counting the hairline cracks in the plaster, my mind looping through numbers and names. The money I'd given, the hours I'd worked, the trust I'd buried and watered like a fool. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I slipped into a blazer and flats, grabbed my bag, and left my apartment with a determination I hadn't felt in years. The Seattle air was brisk, the kind that bites your cheeks and sharpens your spine. Downtown buzzed with its usual rhythm, horns, footsteps, conversations that slipped past like smoke. But inside me, everything was still, cold, focused. I stepped into the glass-paneled office building where I worked and made a beeline to the legal department on the 6th floor. Joran was already there, half sitting on his desk, sipping coffee like it hadn't betrayed him. He looked up when I walked in. "You look like you've been in a war." I shut the door behind me and dropped the letter onto his desk. "Because I have." He picked it up, scanned it, his brow tightening. "Jesus, El, what is this?" "A ghost," I said. "One he tried to bury." Joran read the letter twice. When he looked back at me, something had shifted in his expression, less friend, more co-conspirator. "Are you ready for what this means?" he asked. I pulled out my notebook, the one with every transaction, every invoice, every receipt linked to that house, and slapped it down beside the letter. "I'm not asking for a favor. I want to file a legal notice. I want my $35,000 back." He nodded slowly. "You have documentation?" "Every cent." There was a beat of silence. Then he leaned forward. "Okay, let's do this." As we worked, the office around us blurred into white noise, keyboards tapping, phones ringing, doors hissing open and shut. I barely noticed. My focus tunneled to every line I signed, every paragraph reviewed. Each pen stroke was a small reclamation of the self I'd let Dad dismantle piece by piece. When I handed the last document back to Joran, my hands trembled slightly. Not from fear, from the enormity of it all. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was acting. He glanced up. "This won't be quiet, you know." "I'm done being quiet." He gave me a small, fierce smile. "Good." As I gathered my things, the office lights flickered. Just once, barely noticeable. But it was enough. I turned toward the window behind Joran's desk, the one that overlooked the parking lot. In the reflection, I saw a figure standing across the street. Dark coat. Still, watching. I stepped closer to the glass. But when I turned to look directly, they were gone. "Something wrong?" Joran asked. I hesitated. "Probably nothing." But my heart was already ticking faster. I didn't tell him about the voicemail, or the tracks outside the estate. Not yet. Because whoever it was, they weren't ready to be seen, and neither was I, not fully. But that didn't mean I'd stop. That night, back at my apartment, I curled up on the couch with a cup of tea and opened my laptop. I pulled up the tax records for the estate, the official deed transfer documents. It was all there, the property under Celine's name. Gifted from Victor Marwood. Clean, legal, cruel. I read it again, then once more, until the words blurred and my eyes stung. My phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. It was Celine. I let it ring, then voicemail, then a text. "Please, we need to talk. I didn't know everything, I swear." My thumb hovered over the screen. Didn't know everything, or didn't want to? I turned the phone face down. I wanted to believe her, but I'd spent a lifetime mistaking silence for innocence. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows like something wanted in. I shut my laptop and stood, stretching, trying to shake the tension that had glued itself to my spine. I walked to the kitchen, poured the tea into the sink, and watched the steam spiral down the drain. My mind kept circling the same question. If Dad had covered up a failed deal years ago, who else was involved? And what had it cost to make it disappear? Because people like Victor didn't erase evidence. They replaced it. The doorbell rang. I jumped. It was 9:41 p.m. I wasn't expecting anyone. I crept toward the peephole and looked. No one. But on the mat, a plain white envelope. No stamp. No name. Just a single word typed across the front in all caps. Enough. I picked it up with a shaking hand. It was sealed. I didn't open it. Not yet. I wasn't sure if it was a warning or a challenge. Either way, I was going to answer. The envelope sat unopened on my kitchen counter the next morning. White, blank, still whispering, but I wasn't ready to hear whatever was inside just yet. My focus had shifted because Celine had just texted again. Please, I'll come to you. No more hiding. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering. My stomach clenched. I wasn't sure if it was anger or anticipation, maybe both. I finally replied, 1 hour, my place. The rain had started by the time she arrived, soft, persistent, the kind that made the windows fog and the world feel distant. She stood at my door in a beige trench coat, eyes red-rimmed and fingers wrapped tight around her purse strap. Her hair was down, rare. She usually pulled it back in that perfect, polished way Dad always complimented. Now, she looked exposed. I stepped aside without a word. Inside, the apartment was quiet. I hadn't turned on any lights, just let the gray filter in through the blinds. The room smelled faintly of ginger tea and yesterday's fear. She sat down carefully on the edge of the couch, like the cushions might reject her. I didn't offer coffee. I didn't sit. She broke first. I didn't want the house. Her voice cracked on didn't. I told Dad I didn't want it. I begged him not to make a scene at the wedding. I cut her off. But you took it. She flinched. I didn't have a choice. I crossed my arms, leaning against the wall just far enough that I didn't have to feel her regret pressing into me. There's always a choice, Celine. She looked up, eyes shining. He threatened to cut me off. Said if I told you what he was planning, I'd lose everything. The trust fund, the wedding, the career connections. He said you'd be fine. You always were. My jaw tightened. Is that what you told yourself? That I'd be fine? She opened her mouth, closed it, nodded, barely. Tears started to pool, but I refused to let her off the hook with sentiment. Not yet. You knew I paid into that house. She nodded again, slower this time. Yes. My heart thudded like a war drum, but I stayed still. And you watched me get pushed out of it, in front of everyone. I thought, her voice broke. I thought he'd back down after the wedding. I didn't think he'd go through with it like that. I didn't think he'd be so cruel. That word, cruel. It fit him better than father ever had. The room was suddenly too quiet. Even the rain outside seemed to pause. I finally sat across from her. You were the only one who could have stopped it. One word from you and the whole charade would have collapsed. I know. Her hands trembled in her lap. But I was scared. I leaned forward, voice low. So was I. My entire life. But I didn't let it turn me into a coward. Her face crumpled, but I didn't soften. Because here was the twist I hadn't expected. Not just that she'd known, but that she'd accepted it. She hadn't been forced into betrayal. She'd settled into it. I wanted to tell you so many times, she whispered. But every time I got close, he'd say something. Remind me what I'd lose. He said you wouldn't understand, that you'd make it worse. I almost laughed. Worse for who? She looked up. For him and me. There it was, the truth, simple and selfish. Her tears didn't fix anything, but they did something else. They unmasked her. Not the golden child, not the victim, just another accomplice. But then she said something that knocked the air out of me. He said he was doing it to protect something from the past, that if the truth came out, we could all lose more than money. My spine straightened. What truth? She shook her head. He wouldn't say, just that it was about an old deal years ago, something that went wrong. The letter flashed in my mind. The words second chance stamped themselves behind my eyes again. Celine's voice dropped. He made me promise to keep quiet. He said you wouldn't stop digging if you found out, that you'd tear everything apart. Maybe I should. We stared at each other, two women raised in the same house, finally sitting on opposite sides of the same wreckage. She reached into her bag, pulled out a check, and slid it across the table. $35,000. I took it from the wedding fund. It's yours. I can't undo what he did, but I can at least return what you gave. I didn't touch it, because this wasn't about the money anymore. It never really was. I stood and walked to the window, watching the rain thicken. Cars moved below like ghosts. She spoke behind me, voice barely audible. He's hiding something, Elle, and I think it's bigger than we know. I turned slowly. You sure you want to be part of what happens next? Her breath caught. I already am. Before I could respond, a buzz rattled my phone on the counter. Another message. Unknown number. Just one sentence. Check the filing cabinet in his study, bottom drawer. I looked at Celine. She saw my face pale. What is it? I didn't answer, because suddenly the game had changed. Again. The message haunted me for the rest of the night. Check the filing cabinet in his study, bottom drawer. It read like a command, but felt like a warning or a dare. The next morning, I called Joran. I need a favor, I said, pacing my living room, the blinds half drawn against the pale light of early Seattle morning. I'm listening, he replied, voice rough from sleep but alert. Meet me in 30. We're going back to the estate. No questions. Just a quiet, steady, got it. By the time we pulled up to the house, the clouds had thickened. The same gravel driveway, the same smug hedges trimmed into perfect boxes, the same heavy silence wrapped around it all. Celine had given me the spare key. She didn't ask what I planned to find. Inside, the air was cool and still. No music, no scent of anything lived in. The house felt abandoned, like something had been drained from it the second the papers were signed over. We walked straight to Victor's study. The door creaked open, and I paused just inside the threshold. Dark mahogany furniture, leather chairs, shelves lined with business books and family photos, like a shrine to control. I'd been in this room hundreds of times growing up, but it had never felt like mine. Joran stood by the desk, eyes scanning. There, I said, pointing. Bottom drawer. He knelt, tugged the handle, locked. I pulled a bobby pin from my coat pocket. Years of self-reliance teaches you strange skills. The lock gave with a reluctant click. Inside, among a few old files and stapled contracts, was a brown envelope, unmarked. Joran handed it to me. I hesitated just for a moment, then opened it. And there it was. Victor's will. Not a copy. The original. And my name had been scratched out. I stared at it for several seconds, willing it to be a trick, a draft, a forgery, anything but what it was. He'd disinherited me, officially. I blinked once, twice, but the ink stayed the same, cold, permanent. The air in the room changed. Joran looked at me. This is huge. I couldn't speak. The sound of my heartbeat grew louder than the wind outside. I felt heat rise in my chest, then spread through my limbs like acid. He planned this, long before the wedding, long before the toast. The betrayal wasn't spontaneous. It was written. I gave him everything, I whispered. Years, money, silence. Joran said nothing. There was nothing to say. My fingers gripped the edge of the desk, nails biting into the polished wood. I felt the tremor in my legs before I could stop it, so I sat. The will shook slightly in my hand. Or maybe it was me. I thought of all the times he'd promised fairness, the lectures about responsibility, the way he'd used the word family like a weapon. He'd never intended to honor me, only to use me. Joran crouched beside me. We can take this to his lawyer, force a disclosure. I nodded slowly. But not yet. Why not? I looked up at him. Because I want to hear it from him first. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing the thick black line crossing out my name, as if erasing me from paper could erase me from the story. I texted Celine, told her what we found. She didn't reply. But just before midnight, she forwarded me an email. The subject line, legal draft, private copy. It was from Victor's lawyer, dated 3 months ago. The attachment confirmed it. The will had been updated before the wedding. This wasn't fallout, it was the plan. The walls in my apartment pressed closer with every breath. I opened the windows, let the chill creep in, tried to calm the fire rising in my chest, but it kept burning. And with it, a single thought. Why? Why go this far? What was he protecting? What had I touched, with the house, the money, the questions, that made me a threat to him? I remembered the letter in the attic. We're exposed. Second chance. And suddenly the will wasn't just a betrayal, it was a cover-up. A way to keep me from asking more, from digging further, which meant I had to dig deeper. The next morning, I met Joran at his office. He was already waiting, a new file folder on the desk between us. What's that? A copy of Victor's business filings over the last 20 years. I pulled it from the Secretary of State database. I raised an eyebrow. You work fast, he smirked. You inspire urgency. We flipped through the pages, and there it was. A gap. 1 missing year, a dissolved LLC, property transfers that went dark. This could be nothing, he said cautiously. Shell companies, loopholes, or the start of what he buried. I didn't say it out loud, but I felt it down to my bones. If Victor rewrote his will to erase me, what else had he rewritten? And why was I just now being pushed out, not years ago? Unless the past was starting to surface, and he knew it. The envelope, the letter in the attic, the missing LLC, the will, everything pointed to one thing. Victor wasn't just hiding secrets. He was building a fortress out of them. But I wasn't knocking anymore. I was kicking the damn door down. I called Celine and told her to stay out of it. Told Joran I'd call when I had something actionable. This part, I had to do alone. I drove to the estate in silence, windows rolled up against the spring wind. The trees lining the driveway bent with the breeze like they were trying to turn away from what was coming. My stomach clenched as I parked and stepped out. The gravel crunched beneath my boots. The sky above hung low and bruised. I didn't knock. I walked in. Victor's study door was half open, like he'd been expecting me. I pushed it wide. He looked up from his chair, calm, a whiskey glass in his hand, still wearing that damn Rolex I helped pay for once. "Well," he said, "I was wondering when the storm would walk through my front door." I didn't speak. I pulled the will from my bag and dropped it on the desk. The pages fluttered like wings. His eyes flicked down. No surprise, just resignation. "You went digging," he muttered, sipping his drink. "You buried me," I replied. "I redirected you." That made me laugh, cold, sharp, humorless. "Call it what you want. You cut me out." He stood slowly and walked to the window. Rain had started again, tapping softly on the glass. "She needs me," he said. I stared at his back. "And I don't?" He turned. His face was tight, jaw working. "You never needed anyone, Elowen. That's your curse." "No," I said, stepping forward. "That's the story you tell to excuse what you did." He didn't answer. I reached into my coat and pulled out the photo I'd found in the attic. One I hadn't shown Joran yet, Victor standing beside a man I didn't recognize, both younger, the same building from the LLC filings behind them. The date? 2006. "Who is this?" I asked. He looked at it, and for the first time in weeks, something flickered in his eyes. "You don't know what you're playing with." "I think I do," I said. "A ruined deal, a hidden debt, a cover-up so messy you had to erase your own daughter to keep it from leaking." He stepped forward too fast. "I gave you everything." "You took everything," I snapped, and handed it to Celine with a smile. "She was going to fall apart." His voice cracked through the room like thunder. "She needed something real, something secure. You always landed on your feet. You always fought back. So you punished me for surviving?" My voice dropped, trembling at the edge. "You weaponized my resilience?" His shoulders sagged. The glass trembled in his hand. "She's weak," he muttered. "No," I said. "You made her that way." He turned, stumbled slightly. His face flushed a deep red, and then he clutched his chest. It was so sudden I blinked. His hand pressed tight against his shirt. Breath shallow, eyes wide. I hesitated, then took a step. "Victor!" He staggered back against the desk. I reached for my phone. "I'm calling." "Don't!" he gasped. His knees buckled. I caught his arm as he slid down the side of the desk, sweat beading on his brow. The room tilted. Sirens. No, wait, just in my head. I hit 911, barked the address, gave a name I wasn't even sure I believed anymore. And then we waited. I knelt beside him, not sure whether to press his hand or pull away. "I didn't mean," he whispered, eyes fluttering. I didn't speak. I didn't cry. But I watched him like I'd never seen him before, not as a father, not as a liar, just a man losing control of the empire he'd built on manipulation. The paramedics arrived 5 minutes later. They worked quickly, efficiently, hooked him to machines, loaded him into the ambulance. I rode in silence behind them, lights flickering across the windows like sirens across a lifetime. At the hospital, Celine met me in the waiting room, pale, shaken. "What happened?" she whispered. "He collapsed." Her hands trembled. "Is he going to die?" I looked at her. "I don't know," I said. "But what I did know was this. If he lived, I needed answers. And if he didn't, I needed to find out what he was still hiding before it died with him." Hospitals have a sound that clings to you, low beeping monitors, distant coughs, the shuffle of nurses' shoes against linoleum. Time becomes thick, syrupy. Every second stretches. Victor was in a private room, unconscious. The doctors didn't say much. They never do. Stable, but under observation. Maybe he'd pull through. Maybe he wouldn't. I stood at the end of the hallway, staring through the small glass panel in his door, arms crossed tight. Celine sat inside, curled into a visitor's chair, wiping her nose. She looked like a little girl again, but I didn't feel like a daughter anymore. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I pulled it out and checked the screen. Unknown number, again. I answered this time. Static crackled. Then a low voice. Male, older, deliberate. Elowen Marwood? I stepped away from the door. Who is this? I knew your father, a long time ago, before he was the man you think he is. I froze. You need to explain. You don't know half of it. He buried more than money. He buried people and land, property tied to debts he couldn't pay. My pulse quickened. What land? The voice paused. You want the truth? Yes. Then you'll have to dig deeper than a will and a wedding. There's a deed your father never filed. Ask him about 2006. Ask about the lost property. Why are you telling me this now? Another pause. Then, because secrets don't stay buried forever. Not even Victor's. The line went dead. I stared at the screen. Just static now. No trace, no number. The hospital lights overhead hummed louder than before, or maybe it was just the blood rushing in my ears. I turned to the window and stared out at the gray skyline of Seattle. Beneath the surface of everything, the buildings, the money, the respect, there was rot, and now it was seeping up. Back in the waiting room, Joran was seated with a tablet on his lap, scrolling through property databases. You okay? He asked without looking up. I handed him my phone. Someone just called, said Victor's hiding more than cash, a property, something tied to his debt. His brow furrowed. You get a name? No, but they mentioned 2006, a missing deed. He tapped on the screen, pulling up county records. I'll start from there. I sank into the chair beside him, tension clinging to my shoulders like wet clothes. Who was my father? I murmured. Joran glanced over. I don't think even he knows anymore. I closed my eyes for a beat. Let the weight of that settle. The truth was shifting under me, like walking across ice and hearing it crack. We spent the next hour digging. Parcels of land in Victor's name, limited partnerships, transfers to shell corporations. It was like chasing a shadow, until Joran found it. Here, he said, turning the tablet toward me. There was a holding company, VM Holdings, LLC, formed in 2004, dissolved in 2006. One transaction, never completed. A 17-acre property in rural Washington near Aberdeen, marked as disputed claim, then nothing. My breath hitched. Why would he hide that? Because the land was flagged for contamination, something environmental. Toxic waste lawsuits were pending. The company folded. But if he signed a deal with investors without disclosing it, it could ruin him, I finished. Reputation, finances, everything. And if that deed still exists, it's leverage. My mind spun. The wedding, the will, the sudden heart episode. He wasn't just controlling. He was desperate. Desperate enough to fake a breakdown? I stood. I need to go back to the house. Joran looked wary. Alone? I won't touch anything. Just look. He nodded slowly. Keep your phone on. I drove back to the estate just before dusk. The clouds had thickened, turning the sky bruised blue. The gate creaked as I pushed it open by hand. The automatic sensor wasn't working. Inside, the house was still. The kind of stillness that feels staged. Too clean. Too controlled. I went back to the study. Checked every drawer, every cabinet. Nothing. Then I remembered something. A long, narrow drawer built into the base of the bookshelf, hidden behind a molding strip. Victor used to keep foreign currency in there when we were kids. I crouched, ran my fingers along the edge, found the latch, clicked it open. Inside, a thin leather folder. My hands shook as I opened it. There it was. A deed, dated July 18th, 2006, signed by Victor Marwood, but never recorded. I stared at it, the words blurring slightly. The property listed matched what Joran found. The buyer's name, scratched out. The seller, a shell entity with no contact number. But someone knew. Someone still had this on him. And now, so did I. My phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. This time, just one sentence in a text. Don't trust the apology. I stood in the darkened study, fingers clenched around the folder, heart thudding like a war drum. Because if the apology came, I needed to know what it was covering for. I didn't go back to the hospital right away. I drove. Nowhere in particular, just away. The city lights blurred behind the raindrops streaking across my windshield, and every turn I took felt like I was outrunning something I couldn't yet name. But I couldn't avoid it forever. When I finally stepped into the family therapist's office, the air felt thick, too warm, like it didn't belong to any of us. The chairs were arranged in a half circle, soft light glowing from a corner lamp, neutral tones, scent of citrus, the kind of space built to make people believe in peace. Victor sat on the far left, a blanket across his knees. Celine was beside him, hands folded, eyes flicking from him to the floor and back again. The therapist, a woman named Linda, gestured gently for me to take the last seat. I didn't speak. I just sat down and stared at the floor until the silence began to collapse under its own weight. Victor cleared his throat first. I suppose this is overdue. His voice was thin but steady. I didn't look at him. Linda leaned in. Victor, I think Elowen would benefit from hearing you speak honestly. Not about business, about what happened before. He nodded, slowly. Then he began. I was 16 when my father walked out, left us nothing but an envelope of unpaid taxes and 2 weeks of electricity. My mother worked 3 jobs just to keep us from being evicted. I swore I'd never be that weak. His hands trembled in his lap, but he didn't stop. So I built. I clawed. I made deals I shouldn't have. Some worked. Some cost me more than money. That land in Aberdeen? It was supposed to be my breakthrough. But the contamination was real. People got sick. Lawsuits followed. I buried it. A silence fell that no candle or couch could soften. I didn't want you to grow up like I did, he said, turning to me. But I overcorrected. I made strength the only currency, and when you showed it, I resented you for not needing me. My throat tightened. My nails dug into the chair's armrest. And Celine? He glanced toward her. She reminded me of my mother, soft, scared. I wanted to protect her. And so you punished me. He didn't deny it. Celine's voice cracked through the quiet. Why didn't you just say any of this sooner? His answer came barely above a whisper. Because then I would have had to admit I was wrong. My eyes burned, not from sadness, from exhaustion. Linda looked at me. Elowen, do you want to respond? I didn't look at anyone when I spoke. I spent my life trying to earn your approval, like it was some prize you'd hand out once I'd bled enough. But you were never protecting anyone. You were hiding behind us. Victor's shoulders slumped. Celine reached for my hand. I didn't pull away, but I didn't squeeze back. Outside, rain tapped the windows like a reminder that the world was still moving. That time hadn't frozen just because the truth had finally been spoken aloud. Later, we walked out together. The air smelled like wet pavement and unfinished things. Celine wrapped her coat tighter around her. That felt real. It was. She hesitated. Do you believe him? I believe his pain, I said. I don't know if I believe his change. We stood there for a beat, and then my phone buzzed. Another unknown number, a voicemail this time. I stepped away, heart already racing, and hit play. The voice was the same, the one who'd warned me before. Elowen. He's not done lying. That land? There's more to it than a lawsuit. You're close, but don't stop now. Look into the records from the year before, and whatever you do, don't trust the medical file. The message ended. I stared at the screen. Don't trust the medical file? I looked back at the building. Victor, frail in his chair, Celine still trying to find her version of truth. And suddenly, the pieces shifted again. What if his collapse wasn't real? What if even now he was playing us? I turned to Celine. We need to get the hospital records. She blinked. What? Now, I said, before he knows we're asking. Because I had a sick feeling in my stomach. And it wasn't grief, it was suspicion. Hospitals smell like plastic and chlorine. It's meant to reassure you, clean, sterile, safe. But as I walked down the corridor beside Celine, the scent turned my stomach. The voicemail was still echoing in my head. Don't trust the medical file. We reached the reception desk of the cardiology wing. Celine hesitated beside me, biting her lip. "You're sure about this?" she whispered. "No," I said, "but I have to be." The nurse behind the counter looked up, cheerful in a mechanical way. "Can I help you?" "My name's Elowen Marwood. I need a copy of my father's test results, EKG, enzyme panels, everything from the night he was admitted." Her brows lifted slightly. "I'll need a release form, or written consent." Celine stepped forward, voice soft but clear. "He signed me in as his next of kin. I'm authorized." The nurse hesitated, then nodded, tapping into the system. A few minutes later, she handed over a manila envelope. We didn't open it until we were back in Celine's car. The rain had started again, pattering gently on the roof, a hush that made the silence between us feel heavier. I pulled out the documents and scanned the summary sheet. Normal enzyme levels, normal troponin, no signs of cardiac distress. The EKG, inconclusive, no arrhythmia, no infarction. In other words, no heart attack. I looked up, throat tight. He faked it. Celine stared at me, mouth slightly open. But the medics said he staged the symptoms, the shortness of breath, the chest clutching. It was a show. For what? To shut me up, I said. To buy time, to make himself look too fragile to question. She leaned back in her seat, jaw slack. God. I closed the folder and pressed it to my chest, like I was holding something toxic. The rain thickened, fogging up the windows, all that vulnerability, all that guilt. Manufactured. A wave of disgust rolled through me, and something sharper underneath, humiliation. He'd played me. Again. Back at my apartment, I spread everything across the kitchen table. The letter from the attic, the unfiled deed, the printout of the shell company tied to the contaminated land, and now the medical file, proof that his collapse was nothing more than a tactic. Joran came by an hour later. He took one look at my face and didn't bother with pleasantries. "You found something." I handed him the folder. He read in silence, lips pressed in a flat line. When he finished, he looked up. "That's fraud," he said. "If he submitted any claims under this, I don't care about insurance." "Then what do you care about?" I sat down hard. The truth, the whole truth, not his story, not his legacy, the real cost. Joran sat across from me. "He's unraveling, Elle. Desperate people don't just hide, they lash out." I thought about the envelope that showed up at my door, the cryptic voicemails, the person watching from across the street. Was it Victor, or someone he'd crossed? "I think someone's keeping tabs," I murmured, "and I think they know more than I do." Joran leaned forward. "Then maybe it's time you flipped the script." We stared at each other. "I want to confront him," I said. "About the fake heart attack?" "About all of it. That could backfire. Or," I said standing, "it could force his hand." The next day I walked into Victor's hospital room alone. Celine waited outside, too shaken to come in. He looked up from the bed, IV line trailing from his wrist, oxygen tube draped across his lap like a prop he forgot to wear. "Feeling better?" I asked. He offered a weak smile. "Your voice is the best medicine. Save it." I dropped the folder on his lap. He blinked at it, then slowly opened it. I watched his face shift. Not surprise, just calculation, damage control. "You faked it," I said, "so I'd back off, so Celine would worry, so everyone would forget the real conversation." "Elowen?" "No," I said sharply. "You lied. Again." He sighed, fingers curling over the edge of the folder. "I needed time." "For what?" "To fix it. To protect you." "From what?" I snapped. He didn't answer, and I saw it, clear as glass. He wasn't sorry. He was cornered. Joran's words echoed in my head. Desperate people lash out. I leaned in close. "I'm done playing the daughter who keeps your secrets. I have the deed, the filings, the names. If you don't tell the truth, someone else will." His jaw tightened. For the first time, I saw fear flicker beneath his practiced calm. Then, unexpectedly, a knock at the door. A nurse stepped in, holding a small envelope. "This came for you, Mr. Marwood." He took it with trembling fingers. The nurse left. He stared at the envelope, lips parted. "What is it?" I asked. He didn't speak. I reached for it and pulled it from his hands before he could stop me. Typed on the front, "One of us still remembers." Inside, a photo. The same property in Aberdeen. Only this time, there was a child in the frame. Victor's hand on his shoulder. But it wasn't me, and it wasn't Celine. The boy in the photo haunted me. Dark hair, 8, maybe 9 years old, standing beside Victor like he belonged there, only he didn't. Celine confirmed it. "That's not anyone from our family," she whispered when I showed her. "I've never seen that kid before." Neither had I, but Victor didn't deny it. When I held the photo in front of him, he stared at it for a long time. His lips parted. His eyes grew glassy, not with tears but memory. "His name was Caleb," he said finally. "He was my first attempt at starting over." It hit me like cold water. "You had another child." "I tried," he said, "with a woman I met after your mother died. But the land deal, it went under fast. Lawsuits came for everything. She left, took the boy, but not before threatening to expose what I'd done." "And did you try to fix it?" He looked away. "I did what I always do. I buried it." The silence after that was unbearable. I left the hospital without another word. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, a stack of documents beside me and that photo in my hand. My father wasn't just manipulative. He was layered with secrets like a house built on top of old, forgotten rooms. I could dig forever, or I could finally choose to build something of my own. I opened my laptop, created a folder, Haven Homes, proposal draft. I'd been thinking about it for weeks, but now it felt urgent. A nonprofit real estate program for single mothers, transitional housing, financial literacy, childcare. Everything I never got. Everything Celine was shielded from. Everything that boy in the photo probably lost, too. I took a breath and began writing the mission statement. Haven Homes exists to give women and children a new start, rooted in safety, dignity, and ownership. My fingers didn't hesitate. Not this time. The next morning, I met Celine at a downtown cafe. She was already there, hair pulled back, fingers wrapped around a paper cup like she was anchoring herself. "I want to do something different," I told her, her brow furrowed. "Like what?" "Take the $35,000, start over, not just for me, for people like us, people who got forgotten." Celine's eyes welled. "You mean, with me?" I hesitated, then nodded. "If you want in." She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for years. "Yes, I do." We spent the rest of the week drafting a proposal, pulling from everything we'd learned, the mistakes, the lies, the debt, the need. Joran helped with the legal paperwork, connecting us to city grants. We registered the nonprofit within a month. Haven Homes became real. We toured vacant lots, applied for permits, wrote grant proposals in coffee shops, until our backs ached. Victor didn't call, we didn't visit. But the work, it filled something. Not fixed, but fortified. On opening day, Celine and I stood side by side in front of a crowd of city officials, local press, and 3 women who had already signed on as future residents. The ribbon fluttered in the wind. Joran handed me the scissors. "Go ahead," he said. "You built this." I cut the ribbon. Applause followed. But behind it all, I felt something deeper, a clean break from everything I used to believe about legacy. It wasn't about inheritance. It was about intention. Celine and I hugged. It wasn't perfect, but it was something honest. Later that evening, while locking up, I saw an envelope taped to the front door. No stamp, just one word. "Still yours to find." Inside, a deed. But not the Aberdeen one. This one was older, different county. Same signature, Victor Marwood. Only this time, under owner of record, was my name. Typed, dated 2 weeks ago. I stood there, fingers trembling. He'd given something back. But was it redemption or another trap? The deed sat heavy in my hand. Different county, different land, same signature, Victor's. And below it, typed in clean black ink, Elowen Marwood, owner of record. I stared at the page until my vision blurred. After all the lies, all the games, I didn't know if this was a peace offering or just another move in his long con. But I made a choice. I filed it anyway, because this time I wasn't letting my past dictate what came next. 2 weeks later, we opened the doors to Haven Homes. Celine and I stood side by side, cutting the ribbon in front of a crowd of local families, volunteers and donors who believed in second chances, the real kind. The kind built from truth, not manipulation. Joran handed me a microphone. "You want to say something?" I didn't plan to, but something rose in my throat, so I stepped forward, the wind tugging at my sleeves. "My name's Elowen," I said, "and this place was born from pain, from betrayal, from silence." But sometimes, we don't get to rewrite the past. We only get to build something better from it. The crowd clapped, but I barely heard it, because in that moment, for the first time, I felt something settle in me. Not closure, but clarity. That night, back at the house, I sat with Celine on the front steps. The building still smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings. "You think he knew?" she asked, nudging the deed I'd left on the table behind us. "That I'd file it?" I shrugged. "Probably." "You think it means anything?" I looked at the stars above the city skyline. They were faint but steady. "I think it means he knew I wasn't coming back." We sat in silence for a while, the kind that doesn't hurt anymore. Inside, the women we'd housed were unpacking. Their kids were laughing down the hallway. A lullaby drifted faintly through a cracked door. This was the sound of a new legacy. 2 days later, a letter arrived. No return address. The same handwriting as the envelope from the hospital. Inside, a photocopy of an old bank transfer. Victor Marwood. To C. Redmond. Guardian Trust. Amount $35,000. Memo, debt repaid. Date 2007. The year everything began to unravel. The boy, Caleb. The same name Victor had whispered in the hospital room. The one he'd buried. He had tried to make it right once. Quietly. Secretly, maybe even cowardly, but the proof had lived. I didn't tell Celine. Some things were better left in the drawer of a locked filing cabinet, known but not weaponized. Instead, I tucked the paper into my notebook, beneath the Haven Homes charter. Victor never saw the opening of the center. He didn't call, didn't write, but he sent what mattered: the land, the name, the quiet. Sometimes people redeem themselves not through apology, but absence. Weeks passed. Donations grew. Women moved in. Lives shifted. One afternoon, I stood in the courtyard and watched a boy kick a soccer ball across the gravel. His mother laughed, adjusting her ponytail, watching him like he was the only light in the world. Celine came outside, clipboard in hand. "You coming to the budget meeting?" "In a minute," she smiled. "Take your time." She didn't need to say thank you. She showed it every day. So did I. Because in the end, this wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming what was mine, not just money or property or even truth, but voice, direction, peace, and forgiveness. Not for him, but for me. Forgiveness that allowed me to live without needing the last word. Sometimes the greatest justice isn't what you take back. It's what you choose to give forward. So if you've made it this far, thank you for listening. And if you've ever been betrayed, silenced, or left behind, just know your story doesn't end there. Subscribe to hear more true-to-the-bone stories like this video if it moved you. Comment if you've ever fought your way free, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. We'll see you in the next one. The deed sat heavy in my hand. Different county, different land, same signature, Victor's. And below it, typed in clean black ink, Elowen Marwood, owner of record. I stared at the page until my vision blurred. After all the lies, all the games, I didn't know if this was a peace offering or just another move in his long con. But I made a choice. I filed it anyway, because this time I wasn't letting my past dictate what came next. 2 weeks later, we opened the doors to Haven Homes. Celine and I stood side by side, cutting the ribbon in front of a crowd of local families, volunteers, and donors who believed in second chances, the real kind, the kind built from truth, not manipulation. Joran handed me a microphone. "You want to say something?" I didn't plan to, but something rose in my throat, so I stepped forward, the wind tugging at my sleeves. "My name's Elowen," I said, "and this place was born from pain, from betrayal, from silence. But sometimes we don't get to rewrite the past. We only get to build something better from it." The crowd clapped, but I barely heard it. Because in that moment, for the first time, I felt something settle in me. Not closure, but clarity. That night, back at the house, I sat with Celine on the front steps. The building still smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings. "You think he knew?" she asked, nudging the deed I'd left on the table behind us. "That I'd file it?" I shrugged. "Probably. You think it means anything?" I looked at the stars above the city skyline. They were faint but steady. "I think it means he knew I wasn't coming back." We sat in silence for a while, the kind that doesn't hurt anymore. Inside, the women we'd housed were unpacking. Their kids were laughing down the hallway. A lullaby drifted faintly through a cracked door. This was the sound of a new legacy. 2 days later, a letter arrived. No return address. The same handwriting as the envelope from the hospital. Inside, a photocopy of an old bank transfer. Victor Marwood, to C. Redmond, Guardian Trust. Amount $35,000. Memo, debt repaid. Date, 2007. The year everything began to unravel. The boy, Caleb, the same name Victor had whispered in the hospital room. The one he'd buried. He had tried to make it right, once. Quietly, secretly, maybe even cowardly. But the proof had lived. I didn't tell Celine. Some things were better left in the drawer of a locked filing cabinet. Known, but not weaponized. Instead, I tucked the paper into my notebook, beneath the Haven Homes charter. Victor never saw the opening of the center. He didn't call, didn't write, but he sent what mattered: the land, the name, the quiet. Sometimes people redeem themselves not through apology, but absence. Weeks passed, donations grew, women moved in, lives shifted. One afternoon, I stood in the courtyard and watched a boy kick a soccer ball across the gravel. His mother laughed, adjusting her ponytail, watching him like he was the only light in the world. Celine came outside, clipboard in hand. "You coming to the budget meeting?" "In a minute," she smiled. "Take your time." She didn't need to say thank you. She showed it every day. So did I. Because in the end, this wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming what was mine, not just money or property or even truth, but voice, direction, peace, and forgiveness. Not for him, but for me. Forgiveness that allowed me to live without needing the last word. Sometimes, the greatest justice isn't what you take back. It's what you choose to give forward. So if you've made it this far, thank you for listening. And if you've ever been betrayed, silenced, or left behind, just know your story doesn't end there. Subscribe to hear more true-to-the-bone stories like this video if it moved you. Comment if you've ever fought your way free, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. We'll see you in the next one.